Hello, today is Tuesday, January 12th of 2020. My name is Evan Solis. I'm interviewing Laura Barberena for the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Mrs. Barberena, that this interview will be placed in the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at UT Austin. If there is anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there's something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we will talk about it. Because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting. So I'll ask you a series of 5 questions. Please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. There are 2 questions we need to make sure you agree to before we go on. 1, Voces wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the Benson Library at UT Austin. We will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to Voces. Do you give Voces consent to archive your interview and your materials at the Benson Library? I can't hear you. I don't know if it has to do with, did I mute you somehow?
Yes, I agree. Hello, hello.
I hear you now. Okay. Yes, you agree. Okay, thank you.
Okay, yes, I agree.
Okay, thank you. Next, do you grant Voces copyright over the interview and any material you provide? Yes. Okay, I barely hear you. It sounds like my volume is up to the maximum. I'm not sure if it has to do with the AirPods.
I guess I could just take these off.
That's a lot better.
Just take them off.
I'm not sure what it is.
Let me just do that.
That's much better, yeah. That's much better. Although now I hear me. It's always something. Okay.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, perfect. Let me just.
Yes, I agree. Yes.
Yes, you agree to that second question about copyright. Okay. And do you agree to allow us to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, thank you. So 2 other questions. Okay, yeah, sure. I'll let you put those on.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we have many questions in a pre-interview form that we have already filled out. We use that information from the pre-interview form to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server. Before we send it to the Benson, we would have stripped out any contact information for yourself or family members, so that will not be part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Benson Library. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file available to researchers at the Benson?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, and last one. On occasion, Voces receives requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or your email with journalists?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, thank you for all that, Laura. And now we can get to the actual interview. So there's I've looked at, we did a pre-interview and I've looked a bit at your background, and there's a lot of questions I'd like to ask you. But just to start off, I'd like to ask you in your own words, please, to just give us the synopsis of who you are, right? Where you're from, what your personal background is, and what you do.
Sure. Okay. So my name is Dr. Laura Barberena. I was born and raised in Austin, Texas. I am the daughter of an immigrant from Mexico. My father immigrated from Mexico when he was a young man. My mother is also Latina, born and raised in Texas, and sort of the families that didn't cross the border crossed them. So she had been in the United States for many generations, at least in Texas. So grew up, attended public schools in Austin, went to the University of Texas at Austin for my undergraduate degree. After I completed that, I moved to New Mexico, lived there for a few years, then came to San Antonio. And here in San Antonio, I got my master's degree at St. Mary's University. And then after that, applied to the University of Texas at Austin for my PhD. And I got a PhD in communication studies from the Moody College of Communications, where I specialize in rhetoric, but I specialize in political rhetoric. So what I do now and what I've been doing for most of my career is I work in the area of political communications. So I'm a political communications consultant. So, and what that means is I run campaigns both at the local level. So I do a lot of judicial races. I recently worked on the district attorney's race here, Joe Gonzalez. I was his campaign manager. And so work on various races locally. And then on the national level, I specialize in Latino political communications. So I work on Spanish language outreach for voters. And I'm also a professional focus group moderator. So I moderate focus groups primarily around issues of politics and public policy. And I've been working in politics pretty much most of my professional career. When I moved to New Mexico from Austin, I had just graduated from UT, and was working at a Spanish kind of advertising agency where we specialized primarily in automotive advertising. And then by just sort of a luck, we ended up doing, it was my first entrance into politics. It was 1996, I think it was, or 92. It was 1992. So it was the Clinton Gore re-election. It was their second term, and I was part of an agency at the time. It was called Gutierrez and Associates. No, Hispanic USA. I apologize. It was called Hispanic USA. And we, for the first time at the DNC, they were actually doing a line item budget for constituencies. So basically you have budgets, and it was the first time they line itemed a budget for just Latino outreach. And the gentleman who was responsible for that, Andy Hernandez, is my political mentor and continues to be to this day. So we handled, my firm, we handled all of the Latino outreach for the Clinton Gore campaign. And so that meant producing television, radio, newspaper, magazine ads. Back then, Facebook hadn't really been invented yet, so we weren't doing that. And that's sort of that kicked off my political career. And I've had an opportunity to work on numerous presidential races. I've had a chance to obviously work with the Clintons. I worked on Hillary's election. I've worked with Obama. And I did some work on the Biden campaign as well. So in sort of in national politics, that's the work that I do, is Latino political comm. And then locally, sort of the bread and butter is I run in political campaigns. So, and the industry is constantly changing and technology is changing. And I'm sure we'll get to it. COVID has really kind of changed my field quite a bit. So, but that's what I do. So I work on campaigns and I get people elected to office, and I like to call myself a change agent. So.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Oh, and one last thing I should mention, I have an older sister who's, all my siblings are still in Austin. I have an older sister. She works she's a phlebotomist and works at a clinic. And I have a younger brother who's a computer programmer. And then I have a sister who works in business solutions, business intelligence. And then I am married to Anthony Medrano, who is a mariachi, and we have no children, but we have four-legged ones, and I love them very much.
How many four-legged ones?
I have 2 dogs and 1 cat.
Oh, very cool. And they get along fine?
Oh yeah, they're buds.
I don't know.
They're chilling.
That's good. Well, so Lada, I would like to ask you about all of this, different parts of your biography. This is for Voces of a Pandemic, so I want to focus to start off on COVID and how it's affected you both personally and professionally. So we can start off with the personal aspect, and just want to ask you, to reflect on this past on the now the last year, 2020. Do you remember a time when do you remember, was there a moment or like a time of something that was happening to you where you said, oh, you suddenly realized this is a thing, this pandemic is actually going to be something serious, and this is going to change the way we live for a little while?
Actually, I kind of knew that it was coming. So I work out with a personal trainer, and I go to the gym used to go to the gym every day. Now, because of COVID, when we talk about affecting us personally, that's been a huge shift in my life, because I'm like a total gym rat. I go to the gym like every single day. I take 1 day of rest, and as a result of COVID, I haven't gone to the gym at all. So it's been almost a year since I've been to the gym. So I have a personal trainer, and I work out with him twice a week. And his wife, her father, it's like, her second cousin's next door neighbor. Anyway, so my trainer's wife's father is a major person in Florida. He's I think he's like the head medical examiner for the state or something. Anyway, he's really big. So I'm working out, and my trainer says to me, oh, by the way, you should probably go buy some toilet paper. And I'm like, what? He's like, you should probably go buy some toilet paper and some water, because my father-in-law told me that this coronavirus thing is it's very serious, and it's going to get really serious. And I'm like, okay. So later that day, I stocked up on some toilet paper and some paper towels and, just some like hand sanitizer, some stuff because he kind of warned me, right? So I knew. And then sure enough, within a week, that's when everything hit. And you couldn't buy toilet paper, you couldn't get hand sanitizer, and it just was crazy. So I was really fortunate that I kind of had a little bit of a heads up because this medical professional had been looking at the data and following it very closely in China and in Europe and realized that this was serious stuff. And that had to have been it was probably early January, probably about a year ago when that happened. So
San Antonio, if I'm not mistaken, was a hotspot pretty early on, right?
yes,
There was. Do you remember exactly? I don't remember if like cruise people who were transported to San Antonio. Would you remember exactly how?
yes. So what happened was several folks had gotten stranded on cruise ships, right? Because obviously they port out of Galveston, and so a lot of folks got stranded, and there were people who identified to have been COVID positive, and they didn't want them to port, so they were staying out at sea for a long time, and they're realizing this was not probably uh, feasible for longer periods of time. So what they did was folks that were positive, they shipped them over to one of our Air Force bases, which I believe is Randolph. And so they put them in Randolph in an isolated area where they had their own supposedly air supply and all these things, and they treated them. And so one of the sort of the first big stories that broke here in San Antonio is that a woman had tested negative and then left and went shopping and went to North Star Mall. Subsequently, she was tested again and tested positive. So interestingly enough, what North Star Mall did was they immediately shut down the entire mall, which I think was pretty smart on their part in terms of like when you talk about political communications and crisis management, they shut down the mall and did what they called a deep clean, which we're not really even sure what that means, but it sounded good. And so they deep cleaned the mall. But that was like, and she had apparently visited several places. And so that really was sort of like the first, freak out moment, I think, from sort of like the media perspective that this thing was going to really be out of control. But the mall did shut down, they deep cleaned, and then we started to see the cases tick up and tick up. And of course, we know that these contamination or becoming um, in contact with the virus has a lot to do with your workplace and what you do and your medical conditions and stuff like that. So here in San Antonio, it hit our economy. It just it hit us hard because we are one of the biggest industries we have here is tourism. So as people stop to travel, literally that just sort of cut us off at our knees. So people were no longer having conventions. They weren't filling up the hotels, which affects the restaurant, the Riverwalk, and all the other businesses that thrive on the tourism industry here. And so it hit us pretty hard. And then to top it off, the end of end all was that Fiesta was canceled. Well, actually, they postponed it originally. They originally postponed it to November. And Fiesta is kind of a big deal here, not just because of its party time, woohoo, fun, but because it really does raise a lot of money for nonprofits. It's a whole industry within itself, from the Fiesta medals to the events, and a lot of nonprofits use it as a major fundraiser for them. And I'm also involved in a couple of nonprofits, one of which is the Classical Music Institute, where we basically do live performances. It's I don't perform, I'm not a musician, but I volunteer. But so we have chamber music, and so that all of the live performances, everything got stopped very quickly. And it was it was a scary time. It's they locked the city down, so we kind of went on a lockdown, which is really great. Honestly, in retrospect, I wish we had done it maybe a little bit longer. And then there was the politics of it all, where the governor kind of came in and said, no, you don't have the authority to lock down. Then they politicized the masks, where it became somehow, if you're a Republican, you don't wear a mask. If you're a Democrat, you wear a mask, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. And I blame that 100 squarely on Mr. Trump. At this point, I don't even want to call him the president because he's such a disgrace of this nation. But he is, I like put that blame completely on him, and that he did not have the leadership that we needed as a nation, because we needed folks from, to talk get folks to wear the mask and understand the important role that the mask plays in mitigating the spread of the disease. But our governor decided that he wanted to open back up several industries, and we saw the results of his decisions in increased spikes that we had in the summer, and then now where he's refused to lock things down again. And so now we're experiencing, as of right now, the date of this recording, some of the highest infection rates that we've had this entire time. 2 days ago, we had over 3,000 positives in one day. So we're really, it's getting to this sort of nexus of critical. Of course, with the introduction of the vaccine, I think people kind of see so that there's light at the end of the tunnel. But from all that we understand, that normalcy won't happen till well into the fall of this year.
If you so asking you to put on your PhD political rhetoric hat, what it seems, from an outsider's doesn't know a lot about politics perspective, it seems like it is just a short-sighted, foolish thing to do, to take the stance that, as you've said, President Trump and Greg Abbott and many Republican politicians have, which is this anti-mask, anti-lockdown, or pro sort of a lax approach to COVID. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, if you're advising these campaigns, which obviously it seems like you've been on the other side of the aisle, but I mean, it just seems like a bad, even strategically, it just seems like a bad approach to politics. Right. Why do you think they went?
Well,
what is the logic?
I think the logic is, and it just comes down to money, right? And people's businesses. And when you lock down, people suffer. I mean, and that's just the truth, right? Businesses get closed. You don't have ability to make money. And it really is a strain on the economy, right? And so it's sort of like, how do you find that balance of the economy and locking down, right? And I really was disappointed that our political leadership on the Republican side, I think we all could have been more supportive of their not as vigorous of a lockdown that they were taking had they been supportive of the masks. So it's like the two in tandem is what really created the problem. But had they been very pro-mask, but then say, you know what, but let's try to keep the economy open, then we could have had a road to less infections. But because they decided to take such a heavy stance and take this position where we're going to politicize the mask, which we're learning today that it was still done when the Capitol was attacked. There were several congressmen who, when they were locked down, bunkered in a room, afraid for their lives, refused to put on a mask when they knew they were in proximity of someone. I mean, that's just completely unacceptable. And we all have to take personal responsibility. And for me, that's been sort of like, we talk about the effects of the pandemic and sort of like, where does this put you in personally and emotionally? For me, I've been asking sort of very fundamental questions about us as not just American citizens, but as human beings, like, are we ultimately good or are we evil, right? Do we only care about ourselves or do we care more about our community? And I think these are real important questions to ask. And again, I understand why the Republicans didn't want to shut down the economy, because who wants to shut down the economy? We all want to be able to pay our bills and put food on our table and, survive. But at the same time, to not be in support of the mask mandate, I think was really sort of a really bad decision on their part. I think we could have found that balance. That's what politics is. Politics is the mediation of ideas. That's where we mediate ideas and we come to an understanding of, I'm not going to get everything I want, you're not going to get everything you want, but let's find a medium that we can both agree on. And that's what politics does. But unfortunately, Republicans see politics as all out war, right? It's just, let's just win at any expense. And I think that's really where this, where the Republican Party has really taken a turn. And I don't say all Republicans, because I have friends that are Republicans, and I don't consider Donald Trump a Republican. I've considered Donald Trump, someone who cares about Donald Trump. So, because I think, when you think about most Republicans and where they stand in terms of fiscal conservatism and things of that nature, he does not align with with a lot of their perspectives.
Would you say that you personally have suffered this past year, whether it be, I mean, mental health, finance?
I think the first, when we first learned of the pandemic, it was difficult for all of us, I think, so that first month. But then as people began to realize that this was not something that was just going to be sort of a month thing, it was going to be an extended thing. And they began to think about how we can creatively figure out ways, to work around this pandemic. So, financially, I've been okay. Like I think, the political industry, we've been able to be agile and make the necessary, adjustments that we need to continue the work that we do. But I will say that, the work that I do is very cyclical. So it's like during presidential elections, I have an opportunity to really fill my coffers and have that money there that I can live off for several years. And then, because they tend to be lean after that, and then you go back, and then you go back into another gubernatorial cycle, and then, so it's kind of very kind of like up and down, right? So, while this cycle, again, I did have that uptick that I normally have in a presidential, it wasn't where I normally have. So I don't have that sort of big savings account that I had coming out of this. So I'm experiencing a lot of anxiety right now going into this upcoming year, because this is an off year where we have only municipal elections coming up that tend to be a lot less lucrative. And so the money that I have saved, can probably get me through this year if I can stretch it. But the following year is going to be really rough. So I'm experiencing some anxieties. And then the work that I do as a focus group moderator, that pretty much came almost to a screeching halt. So normally during a presidential cycle, so 4 years ago with Hillary Clinton, I moderated all of the focus groups that Hillary Clinton did. So I traveled to Florida, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, like doing a whole bunch of focus groups in preparation for her run. And a lot of that work is done over the summer. Well, this year, over the summer, we were in COVID, so I didn't travel at all. And usually with my focus group work, I travel at least once a month, maybe twice a month, just because of the work that I do. I work with Latino decisions. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we really only did one series of focus groups for the Democratic National Committee, and that was pretty much it. And those were done virtually. We did not do them in person. So all my work of my focus group has moved virtually, and that's been a bit challenging because it does change the dynamics of focus groups and sort of the rich data that you can get from an in-person group structure and the dynamics that brings. So it has changed that a little bit. It changes that. But definitely in terms of my work, my focus group work pretty much came to a screeching halt. I did very little focus group work, which also is important in terms of the work that we do for communications, right? Because we're testing messages, we're talking to voters, trying to understand where they are, how they feel, why they feel the way they feel. And then we use that knowledge to go in and hone in our messaging as we go in, into paid communications. So, that really changed the dynamic of how we approach politics, because normally now all we were relying on is survey data. So as opposed to the focus group data, which can be a little bit, it's obviously qualitative, and you don't get that rich qualitative data when you're doing a survey.
Would you say that, like in a typical campaign, those focus groups, the results you get from those focus groups, does that drive immediate, or do you leave focus groups, analyze what you have obtained, and does that drive immediate decision making?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because we're testing messages, we're testing, we actually show commercials and say, hey, look at this commercial, what do you think? Right. And so we did that a lot with Hillary, where we ran a lot of commercials, and you say, okay, take a look at this commercial. What do you think? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? So you can make adjustments based on, what they're telling you. And additionally, you can use that information to inform the work that you're doing on the survey side. So say, for instance, we're focus grouping a commercial and something comes up that we hadn't even thought about. Well, then you can incorporate that data into your survey research and ask a question about it, because it wasn't something that we had even thought about before. A perfect example is I did a focus group in the fall for the city of San Antonio having to do with small businesses and procurement. In any case, one of the things that came up was, and this had to do, this is going to be a long ass tangent, so I'll try to keep it short. But essentially the idea was that if you are home based, if your headquarters is in San Antonio, you earn extra points when you're applying for contracts. Well, then the question became, well, now how do we define headquarters in a time with COVID and so many people are working from home? Like, and they're shutting down their quote physical headquarters, even though, so it's sort of like, and I hadn't really thought about that. Like now we're sort of changing, the pandemic has changed the definitions of how companies are structured. And that has effects on the way contracts are awarded, how points are allotted towards contracts. So.
Yeah, so an example of like an actual change that comes about from.
Yeah.
I want to go off into that political branch, but I do want to just do a couple more COVID questions first. So your husband, for example, you mentioned that your husband Tony is a mariachi musician.
Yes. So basically, no performing. Yeah. So for his work, he completely shut down. So he's a musical performer, which he stopped performing completely, and he's what I would consider high risk because he has asthma and high blood pressure. So. Even some folks who were still performing with masks, we decided early on that we didn't want to put him in that situation and risk that. But in addition to being a performer, he also is and he's actually been interviewed as part of the Voces. So see his interview for more details. But I will tell you this, that he also directs and produces some shows in LA, the Mariachi USA show, which is done at the Hollywood Bowl. And then we both do work with the Tejano Music Convention, which is a huge Tejano music convention that happens in Las Vegas. And both of those were postponed, or they ended up creating virtual versions of it. So what my husband ended up doing is basically sort of retooling what he does, and he became extremely and he'd already kind of been doing editing for the work that I do because he helps me in my business. So he was already editing my social media videos and other videos that we were doing for our political clients. So, but he took that skill set and really expanded on it and ended up helping produce a lot of virtual events that were happening over the summer. So he was able to adjust, and frankly, it kind of turned out to be pretty good for him in terms of, financially. He did well, probably better than he would have had just been doing performances. Because a lot of these videos then led to other projects, then led to other projects, sort of word of mouth, right? As everyone realized they weren't going to be able to do live performances, they were quickly looking at ways that they could adjust to that. And so he was there with that newly learned skill set to do that. So
him being at high risk, I imagine y'all have, well, I'll just ask, have y'all been pretty stringent about keeping to yourselves? What is that?
Yeah, absolutely. We pretty much, so I have an office, it's off of Fredericksburg Road near downtown San Antonio. And during this whole pandemic, we were sort of playing it by ear. So during the initial lockdown, we didn't go into the office at all. And then we sort of gradually would go 2 or 3 days a week. And as things sort of tempered down a little bit, we kind of went to sort of somewhat regular hours. But it just became, as the numbers started to spike, we just, tried to stay away from folks and tried to stay in our own little bubble. That really has been sort of the big challenge, I think, in terms of the work that I do. And I think probably a lot of the work, because I consider the stuff that we do is very creative, and you really sort of get energy and ideas from these spaces. And in my office, I have my office, my husband has his office, but we have this big room we call the war room. And in the war room, it's like a sort of like a table, several tables where folks can sit around, and it's just like a gathering place. And coincidentally, my office is 2 doors down from the Democratic Party. So prior to the pandemic, people used to just stop in, exchange ideas. Hey, what's going on? I heard this rumor, so it was really kind of it, which is what I had always imagined that it would be, sort of like the center of politics, right? And lo and behold, so it's my office, the Democratic Party, and right between is a panaderia that has, coffee and pan dulce. So, people pick up their sweets and their coffee and they come over to my office, and it just kind of sort of came this like gathering place where people could come. And it's something that I always had envisioned, that I could create a space like that with the help of my landlord and attorney, Javier Espinosa, who's amazing. He always envisioned this as being a place that we could have sort of like a miniature think tank, for lack of a better word. But that all went away with COVID. And that's been really hard. And so we have tried very hard to stay safe. We did venture out one time right after the election, the November election rather, the Saturday after. A good friend of ours was getting married, and they were having an outdoor wedding in the hill country. So we figured, okay, like we hadn't gone to, and since the pandemic started, we didn't go to any restaurants, we didn't do any social gatherings, we didn't get together with family, we didn't do anything, no parties, nothing. We did go to an anniversary dinner because our anniversary was in October. So we had at a nice restaurant with Senator Van de Putte and her husband, and another friend of ours, Minnie, and her husband, Joe Jesse. So we had a dinner, but that's the only restaurant we had been to the entire time, because it was our anniversary. And so we said, okay, we're gonna go to this wedding. It's outdoors. If we're comfortable, we'll stay. And we felt comfortable, right? It was an outdoor wedding. The reception was like kind of this big airy area. We sat like in a patio area with folks who had their masks on. So we felt real comfortable. Well, if luck wouldn't have it, 2 days later, we get a call that said someone who attended the wedding was positive. So it's like, oh my God. So we freaked out, right? So we went to get tested immediately, set up an appointment to get tested. And thank God we were both negative. But it was just like, oh, like, it was a lesson. You cannot let your guard down, right? You cannot even, and we constantly take precautions. Like, we're those people that when I go pick up food from the fast food or, whatever, like when I bring it home, I wipe everything down. So in my groceries, like I haven't been in a grocery store since I can remember. I don't remember the last time I walked into a grocery store. It had to have been probably in March sometime. I've been really taking advantage of HEB's curbside or their home delivery, but I pretty much, most of the time I do the curbside. So I go online, I order my food, I drive up, they put it in the car. And as soon as I get home, I wipe everything down, I just for extra caution. So we're those people. We're constantly doing that. But I'm very happy to report that, in fact, here in about an hour, Anthony is going to get his first vaccine. So we were able to, San Antonio has created a hub where these central hubs where folks can go and they have mass vaccinations. And I will tell you, I'm a little concerned because my parents who are in Austin, Austin has not been given the vaccines. And I'm just to what we're calling the group 1B, right? Austin is still in 1A. And it's just like a little disconcerting. And I'm getting a little worried because here in San Antonio, we've already moved to group 1B and Austin hasn't. And I'm just kind of like, what's going on, right? And I was talking to one of my friends, a vendor who's in Florida, and he said his father, who's elderly, was not able to get the vaccine in his county. So he went to the next county over. And I started thinking, hey, maybe that's what I need to do here is have my parents, come to San Antonio, drive to San Antonio to get the shot, because I'm not sure what the holdup is in Austin. And I certainly hope politics isn't behind it. But I'm just like really concerned that, this isn't being rolled out equitably across Texas. And obviously, yes, San Antonio has gotten hit pretty hard. So is Houston and Lubbock and Midland and El Paso. But, this in terms of disseminating the vaccine, it's a little disconcerting that, people that I love and care about who are vulnerable don't have access to the vaccine.
Yeah, it seems like, well, that's good to hear that he's getting his vaccine, but it seems like the story that you're telling me about y'all is one that you hear a lot, right? And it seems like y'all were doing everything that was asked of all of us. And then we just start to get complacent once, and suddenly it seems like, it sems like you are a very extroverted person. Maybe if I'm wrong, I don't want to speak for you, but has this been a toll on you mentally? How do you deal with isolation?
Yeah, it has been a toll, especially someone like me, aka extrovert, but then also politics, right? So much of politics, the poly in politics is for people, right? That's the poly, it's the people. And so to not be around people and being able to, and I mean, I still am like, we did the virtual Thanksgiving Zoom, we did the virtual Christmas Zoom with the family and stuff. And, and that's been really hard too, because I do want this for the record. So this is the first time in my entire life that I did not spend Christmas with my parents. And that's hard, one, and that takes a toll on you, just number one, emotionally, right? Because I don't get to physically be with them. But number two, it's also sort of like in your face mortality. It's like, there will be a day where I won't be with them every time. And so it was like, whoa, like this is suddenly, oh shit, now I'm old, right? Like, it's like, oh crap. Like you start to realize I'm getting old, right? And that's not a fun feeling, right? But it has been extremely challenging on the political side because we feed off, in politics, it's, it's that finding someone who shares my values, right? And not being able to break bread with them and see them. And even my, my Republican friends, we argue, like, I can't even see them. And so it's been very hard. And I've also, for me, what's been frustrating is I've seen people who I care about and love, who I won't mention, who are being, who are complacent, who are continuing to go to restaurants and continuing to meet. And it's just like, and they'll say, hey, you want to come eat? Or I was like, no, we're not doing in-person meetings. I'm not doing in-person meetings at all. We're not going to restaurants. And I see other people do it, and it makes me long to do it, and it makes me want to, like, I think to myself, oh, what could it hurt? Just go to a restaurant, have a dinner, and then it's just like, no, like I can't do it. Like, I have responsibility not just to to my family here, but to the community. So, it's been very, very trying and very hard. And when you couple the isolation with the lack of exercise, it's like let's pile on, right? Because exercise is always, it's such an important part to me, and not to be able to do that, like, it's because that's also a way that I get out frustration and anxieties and things of that nature. And I can say that I started to feel like panic attacks again. Like I had panic attacks a long, long, long time ago, but I sort of worked through it through exercise and eating right and all this stuff. Well, I started to kind of feel the anxieties again, the little miniature panic attacks. And I was just like, why is this happening? And I know why it's happening, because I'm not exercising. I'm not, doing what I need to do. And then on top of that, surprisingly enough, as politics got really busy, right? We were busy, busy, busy. It's a presidential election. There's a lot going on, a lot of campaigns that I work on. Then the November elections ended, and two of my clients ended up in runoffs here locally with the college board. So immediately after the election, I'm working on another election, right? And then that ends, and I'm still working on an election because we were working on the Georgia runoff race. I was helping with the John Ossoff race, doing some of the Latino stuff. So it's like working on that. So it's like I felt like I just didn't, and then sort of catching up with all the end of year and the billing and all that stuff. So I felt like typically what happens on a presidential year, my sister and I, and sometimes my husband tags along, we go on a vacation. And we always do it big, right? So we'll go to like Disney World in Florida. We'll go to we just do we do big vacations, right? Oh, New York. We went to New York one time. So this year we had already planned it, like in January. We were like, or last year rather, in 2020, we were like, okay, our big trip after the election will be Disneyland in California, because we wanted to do the Star Wars experience. So we're like, all right, like we're ready. We were like, Star Wars experience was going to be fully open at that time. We were going to stay on property. Like it was like, we were all excited. Well, this hit, and it was just like, I immediately knew, like, we're not going to get the Star Wars experience. We're not going to get to have that vacation. So not having that vacation, I think, has also sort of affected me as well. And as I had to we're back in the new year, campaigns are up again. We're starting, elections are on May 1st here in San Antonio for our municipal races, our city council races. So it's like, wow. So like I'm back in the saddle, and I'm having a hard time. Usually at this, I'm like, oh, I'm raring to go. I'm fired up. I'm ready to hit the next fight again. And I'm having a difficult time because, you know, I think it's just just the lack of interpersonal contact, the not being able to have a vacation, to not just simply like have a real Christmas. This is the first Christmas that I didn't walk into a store. So I did all of my Christmas shopping online. So, and, you know, I like to walk around the stores and look to see at things and, you know, listen to the Christmas music. And it's part of like what makes Christmas Christmas. I didn't do any of that, none. So I think it has certainly affected me emotionally, and it's been challenging. You know, I've been very fortunate, and our family is very fortunate that we've not lost our jobs and that financially we're doing well. So I can't imagine for those who are struggling financially and standing in lines for hours to get food at the food bank. Like, I am extremely blessed. So I feel kind of a bit like you know, like a fresa whiner, like, you know, oh my gosh, like I haven't got to see my parents, you know, like, but I mean, I am very, very blessed. And I am very, very fortunate that we're able to keep food on our table and, you know, continue to be healthy. But there are folks who, you know, friends of ours who, Anthony, my husband, he had a really good friend who was in the hospital for an extended period of time. We had another friend who we love who got it early on and had to be intubated, and he came out of it, thank God. But it's been very scary, and I know families are very struggling because, you know, it's one thing you get COVID, you come out of it, and then, you know, then you get your hospital bill of, you know, how many millions of dollars from being in the hospital, and then that's going to pay another toll on the family. And it's just been, we've been fortunate, but it definitely is a challenging for me emotionally, spiritually, physically. It's been tough. It has, but certainly much better than other people, I will say.
Is there like a benchmark so, you know, vaccines rolling out, there seems to be, you know, light at the end of the tunnel here. Have you thought about when you're going to be able to go to Disneyland, like Disney World? Is there a benchmark that you're looking at, like, okay, when this starts to happen, or when we hear this from X person,
Yeah,
we're going to go out and, you know, this is when we'll begin to feel comfortable interacting again?
yeah. I realistically, I don't think that I'll be back to any kind of normalcy. The earliest would probably be June or July. You know, I think once everyone who's gotten a vaccine that wants a vaccine, I think that's the point at which I'll feel comfortable to veer out. And I think that we're looking probably July-ish from what I can tell in terms of the way things are rolling out. Um, and then, you know, sort of the big question mark is this wonderful vaccine that we got. How long is it going to keep us immune? Like, are we looking at having to get, you know, re-immunized every year, every 2 years? Like, I still think that's a little bit of the unknown. I still haven't been able to quite pin that down, but, you know, I definitely see another 6 months of this, which easily. And it's difficult because the sort of the push and pull in my industry, and you've seen this narrative sort of play out in what happened in Texas with the Biden campaign, and which is so funny because it's like, you know, these narratives that were completely wrong about him winning the Latino vote and how he didn't do well. I mean, he did very well in Texas. He did better than Hillary did. But, you know, the media loves to talk about these narratives where, you know, somehow, you know, Democrats got their butts kicked by Republicans. But and a lot of what was brought up was the fact that Republicans were going door to door and knocking on doors and talking to voters, and Democrats chose not to. I, with all of my clients, just said I didn't want to do it. I did not want to knock on doors. I did not want to have people open the doors. I didn't want to expose block walkers or voters to the virus. I felt it was immoral and irresponsible to do so. The Republicans had a different take. They, again, for them, it's war. They're willing to have collateral damage to win. And that's really an unfortunate perspective to take. But that has certainly been something that has been that my industry is really, really, really struggling with right now. It's like, do we knock on doors? Do we talk to people? And the hard thing is telling clients and explaining to clients that, yes, that's the way campaigns are done, but we're in COVID, right? Because when you think about campaigns like, oh, we're supposed to be knocking on doors, we're supposed to be doing this, like all these things we're supposed to be doing, right? Then now I know I'm running for office because I'm knocking on doors and talking to voters, right? Well, when you're not knocking on doors and talking to voters, they get restless and they feel like they're not campaigning. And it's like, no, you're still campaigning. We're just doing it different. And I think that's sort of been the biggest challenge, is trying to, like, explain to clients that, and all of my clients this last round, pretty much agreed with me that it was not the moral thing to do, to knock on doors and ask people to answer their doors. But there were other Democrats who did, frankly. And that's their decision. And if they can sleep at night with that, then, good for them. But I just thought, even if one person were to get exposed, one person were to get sick, that's on me, right? And then people say, oh, Lauda, but it's safe. You knock on the door, you stand 6 feet back, they have the mask, this brother had the mask. And I'm thinking, okay, fine. But we're going to spend all this money to send people out to go block walking. How many people are realistically going to even open the door? I will tell you, for my part, I don't answer my front door. Even if I get a package, I say, leave it, I'll get it. Like, I don't open the door to people, right? I don't care who they are. So, it just doesn't seem like it's cost effective to be block walking at a time right now. But the narrative has been, well, the Republicans block walked, and that's why Gene Ortiz-Jones lost against Tony Gonzalez, because Tony Gonzalez was block walking. It's like, all right, whatever. Maybe it was just that people preferred Tony Gonzalez over Gene Ortiz-Jones. Maybe they did a better job at communicating, right? Like, I don't know that it was necessarily block walking that won him the election, especially with the district that wide and that huge. But it's a nice narrative that Republicans like to spin.
Yeah, I have heard that narrative, actually. So it's interesting to hear you to bring that up. And you said earlier, like 30 minutes ago, you said campaign industry has always been changing. You've been at this for decades. I'm wondering, and I'm trying to think about how to ask this question so it's not just immensely broad, but aside from block walking, when you think about, and we can start maybe local if that's easier to think about in these terms, but so when it became evident that this year was going to be drastically different than any prior cycle, what did that look like from your perspective? What are the immediate changes? What do you think, if you're reflecting on it, what were the biggest changes in campaigning between this cycle and the last cycle, 2018 cycle, or the 2016 cycle? Let's start with that. So what do you think about that?
Okay, well, I would say definitely in a couple of things. One, as I already mentioned, the block walking, which is huge, right? Because that's a big thing. And then volunteers, right? So typically when you get people to volunteer on a campaign, what are you doing? You're having them block walk, you're having them, come and fill out postcards and do these things. And so these group gatherings where you kind of really can create a sense of togetherness and community around a candidate, all that was gone. So no way of being able to gather, to gather folks together. Very much affected fundraising. How can you fundraise if you don't have an event, right? I mean, that's what you do. You go, you have, really bad hors d'oeuvres and a couple drinks, and they drop off the check, and then that's how you do fundraisers. That's what we do. So it's like completely changing the way fundraisers were done. How do you create a virtual fundraiser, and what does that mean? Do you sell tickets? Is it Zoom? Blah, 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 blah. Well, you remember, like, a year ago, most people hadn't heard of Zoom. Now everybody knows about Zoom. So, just the integrating new technology like Zoom into campaigning, where creating virtual events for fundraisers, and just trying to be as creative as possible about it. It really just completely changed. And then also, like, it also meant, just from a financial perspective, dealing with smaller budgets. Because especially with the local races, maybe on a national level, it didn't affect folks, but locally, folks who normally would have given weren't giving. Here in San Antonio, one of the large areas of the donor class, as we call them, are personal injury attorneys, right? Personal injury attorneys are a kind of a class of folks that we go to often in politics to raise money. Well, personal injury lawyers, guess what? They're not having trials because the courthouse has been shut down. So their flow of income has been shut out. So ergo, what they would normally give campaigns is no longer getting those monies. So it has kind of, essentially a ripple effect. So that really affected campaigns a lot. So we're dealing with smaller budgets, not being able to utilize volunteers in a way that you normally would. So it just made things very, 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 very challenging, and sort of this heavily reliance on social media, which, if you're in areas where there's a digital divide or folks aren't on Facebook, you're missing a big chunk of the electorate. So relying much more on social media, much more on texting, and then emails out the wazoo. Like, I cannot tell you, I'm sure you were probably a victim to getting a bazillion political emails, because it was like, this is the only way we can have conversations with people, right? And the text messages, like, we jokingly said, I haven't seen this many text messages since Bethel ran for governor. What did he run for? No, Congress. No, Senate. Sorry, when he ran for Senate. So so it was just very, very, very challenging in terms of how to reach voters, and just a very, very different than we've seen in years past, particularly on how we talk to voters. So we had to rely more on mail, a lot more on mail, and doing it with smaller budgets too. And then the big thing too is like debate. So a lot of times, you'd have neighborhood associations meet, and they hold little forums or allow the individuals to come speak to the neighborhoods. Well, when we went into the pandemic, a lot of the neighborhood associations simply stopped meeting. Some of them were able to pivot and adapt technology and start doing things virtually and do Zoom meetings, but a lot of neighborhood associations didn't. So there's a whole chunk of people who we were not able to typically engage that we would have in a regular year, because people aren't gathering.
Is there anything, if you think about all the changes you had to make, the different tactics, is there anything that you think we're going to keep doing this, 2 years, 4 years down the line? What would you say?
I would definitely think like creating more online events. So as a way to attract eyeballs to our Facebook pages, we would do things like a town hall. And so, doing sort of these virtual town halls, I think those will continue, because it really does. I think people who have transportation issues, I think it really kind of takes away that barrier. Also, you're seeing a lot of more seniors are getting active in Zoom, and they're learning a little bit the technology, or at least they can go on Facebook and watch it on Facebook Live. So, I think it does provide a little bit more access to folks. That's definitely something I think that, the industry will continue to do. And then the text messaging, for sure. I mean, that was always sort of what was happening to begin with, but I think it will begin to explode even more, more so. I think that's it that I can think of right now.
So pivot a little bit and talk about this narrative, the media narrative about how this election cycle went, and particularly how it went with Latinos, with the Hispanic electorate. I would just keep it simple at first. So you evidently have some criticisms for what some of the narrative is out there. What do you think are some of the big takeaways from this cycle and the role of the different Latino communities that have participated?
Yeah, well, it was built on 1 or 2 counties in the Valley where they saw an increase, in Trump's turnout, and I think a 0.3% increase or something ridiculous among African American men or something. But I just think they take one county and they blow it up and make it seem like that's a representation across the state, and it clearly wasn't. If you look at how we performed in other counties, we did better than we had ever done before, and we increased the Latino vote. So it's always, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there is evidence to show that narrative is completely false. But it's a narrative that the Republicans always tried to spin, trying to make it seem like all Latinos are pro-life and therefore they should stand with the Republicans on social issues. And it's not true. When you look at the data, it shows that, most Latinos tend to be pro-choice. So it's just part of that narrative that they try to spin to make it seem like they have a future with Latinos. And while they continue to create policies that disenfranchise Latinos from voting and other rights that we have as citizens. So until they change their policies, they're not going to increase their Latino vote. But that's been a little frustrating that that the media, but they love that narrative, right? That somehow that that Latinos are turning Republican, and it's just not true.
So my understanding is that Latino Support, and please correct me anything that I'm getting wrong here,
That's
to your
right.
knowledge, is that Latino Support has over the past 20 since like Reagan has topped out around like 30%, 30 to 40%, and it's around particular candidates like Bush, who was relatively popular, and Trump as well. It seems that had reached that sort of higher threshold of what is still a minority of the population. But and we can, again, I know it's difficult to talk about like broad strokes a community like this, but even if it's just locally here in Texas, what do you think are some of the, like, what is working for Republicans? What is working?
Yeah.
What worked for them in this last cycle?
Okay, and I'm going to answer that, but I'm going to put you on hold for just one
Yeah,
second
no
because
problem. Yeah.
Anthony's on his way to go
Yeah,
get
of
his
course.
shot. So hang on just. He can't. He wanted to know if he could get the vaccine in his butt. I told him no, he can't.
Why not?
He's going to ask. Hi, love you. Be careful. He's on his way to go get his vaccine, so we're very excited. But no, he can't get him in the butt. So what are the Republicans doing right? Well, as of right now, not a damn thing. To be honest, not a damn thing. Now, if we're talking about, maybe some of their policies on economic development and helping small businesses, because Latinos tend to be very entrepreneurial. So, keeping taxes low, investing in small businesses, having access to capital for small businesses, and, creating, creating opportunities for small businesses and keeping taxes low, that kind of stuff, I think makes sense and could appeal to the Hispanic voter. But aside from that, their stance on immigration, the separation of children is absolutely immoral. Building of the wall makes absolutely no sense. Not to mention he took money from the Pentagon, which should have been used to drive the wall. He lied. Mexico never paid for it. Their position, which is very, anti-choice, anti-woman. They're continuing to create barriers for voting and suppressing our vote and making it disenfranchising voters. As long as they keep doing that, they're never going to make inroads in our community. That's just the reality of it.
Can we even talk about like I should have prefaced with this, like, can we even talk about a Hispanic community? Like, does that, or the Hispanic voter, like, does that, the Latino voter, does that exist for you? Or are there any, and if so, what, like, broad strokes that we can paint?
Yeah, you're always going to hear like, oh, the Latinos are not monolithic. Everybody comes on MSNBC and says Latinos are not monolithic, and that's the mistake that Democrats make, and yada yada yada. Yeah, it's true. We have different sectors, and we've always done that. In fact, I had been interviewed by a reporter in LA. They're saying, oh yeah, like the Biden campaign, they're doing these commercials where they have like a Cuban person with a voice and then a Mexican doing a voiceover. And I was like, yeah, we kind of have been doing that since the early 90s. She's like, what? I'm like, yeah, like the commercials I produced for the DNC, I had a Cuban sounding voice, for Florida. I had a Spanish sounding voice for, this, like, but a lot of people just sort of like didn't realize that this is stuff that we've always been doing. So, it is a diverse community. We have different accents. We have different words for, banana and beans. Like, I guess that's just the nature of, we're all very different. Latinos are individually and different. And now just with what we call micro targeting, we're able to focus in on those very distinct differences within the Latino community, and remember, all this thing takes time and money, and mainly money. And then how do you, differentiate what from what, right? As we do more and more campaigns, we get more and more data. We get census data. We learn who's, from Venezuela, who's from Mexico. So you're able to micro target messages to those individual communities. But, I still think at the end of the day, democratic values match more along with a sense of what I think of as a Latino community. So there is no such thing as a Latino community, but there is no such thing, it is and it isn't. I don't know. It's like the cat. It is dead and it's not dead. It is at the same time.
Yeah, sure. You said, so 92, you're with Clinton Gore. It's the first time there's a line item, and like if the budget is there's a set amount for Latino communities. So can you put us back into that year and your campaign, sort of what your work is with campaigning specifically, if I'm understanding right, with Latino communities in mind? Like, what does that work look like in 1992?
Oh gosh, it's so much different than what it looks like now, that's for sure. It was basically mass media, so television, radio, film, television, radio, and print. That was sort of it in the days. And it was expensive, right? Real expensive to buy. Keep in mind, this is before Netflix, before streaming. So you basically had your 3 networks and cable. So this is it, right? And this is like in pretty much probably one cable choice in each market too. So you don't have like Dish, and I think there were few people that maybe had satellite dish, but for the most part, and there were these ginormous things in people's front yards, or backyards. But so for the most part, the media was not, and you didn't have all these different sort of like networks that we have now, right? Even the cable channels were pretty limited. You didn't have a whole bunch like we have now. It's just very different. And then keep in mind, the Latino groups that were on the ground tend to focus a lot on voter registration. Really hard to sort of get money for GOTV, or what we call the ground game. And also, I think at that time, a lot of people saw Latinos as just being concerned with immigration issues, right? And so we weren't doing that, but I think at that time, sort of the folks always kind of considered that. And also at that time, and this is important in terms of the industry, that a lot of times the contracts would go to these big Anglo firms, and then they would subcontract, or hire Hispanics. Now what we see is a lot of Hispanic firms, Latino firms that, are getting contracted directly, we were the first to do that. But there were also very few firms at that time. Most of the Latino firms were doing commercial stuff. They weren't doing politics. But now you're seeing a lot more Latino firms who specialize in political communications, because it is very different. Selling a candidate is very different than selling cereal. It just is. And so now today, fast forward, and you're seeing a lot of firms now that are, that specialize in Latino communications, and even those that just specialize in Latino social media, like they actually break it down, right? So, okay, well, we do Latino communications, but we only do television, or we just do social, we just do, ground game, we do mail. So you're seeing a lot of specialization in the field, where before there was no specialization because nobody was actually doing it.
And what do you think, like, when you look at the future, or like even just the next couple cycles that are coming, like, what are you thinking about? What is on your horizon? Like, okay, this is where we have to be focused, or this is what we're waiting to see, how this evolves.
Yeah, I think what we, for me, I think the thing we really need to focus in on is Latino youth. Because I see, and this is true story. This is like way Latino youth, but I think it speaks to what I'm gonna say. So I have a girlfriend who's got a small child. Her name's Luna. She's beautiful. And Luna is just sort of like, just turned 2. right? So she's sort of, talking and walking and all that kind of stuff. So when we're on Zoom calls with her, if you say, "Hey Luna, happy birthday," Luna says, without skipping a beat, "Honk honk," because that's her reality. When you say birthday, for her, it's honk honk. For her, birthday means a drive-by parade in front of your house, because that is her understanding and comprehension of what it means to have a birthday. It means you drive around and you honk your horn. So it's just like, what? And we joking, and now we actually kind of got into where we tease her. We say, "Hey Luna, happy birthday!" Honk, honk. It's funny. It's funny, but it's also kind of sad, right? So, and the reason I bring this up is because I think about our youth and those young people who are watching our capital be invaded by insurrectionists. Like, it concerns me because I don't want that to be their normal. I think we have a lot of work to do to ensure that our young people understand the value of democracy and the value of participation, and that there is no place for violence in our system of government. I don't want them to not protest. I want them to still be able to protest and create, the awareness that needs to be done around issues, because we'll always continue to fight for what's right. But I'm very concerned about how do we keep this next generation from understanding that that's not America, even though it probably is, which is kind of very scary. But just trying to teach these young children who, frankly, I'll meet someone who's, in college, and they'll be like, "Oh, I wasn't even born at 9/11." And I'm like, "What? Like, what about you? Were you born at 9/11?
Yeah, I'm 27, so I was
Okay, so
a
you're already
child,
born.
but yeah, I remember it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, so there's some people who don't, right? And they're adults, right? And
Yeah.
it's just like, kind of freaks me out. So, so in their reality, taking your shoes off to go to the airport is something they've always done, right? So, I mean, I guess that's my big concern as I look to the future. And I know that's not necessarily like when I think of, because I think about politics and I think about campaigns, and, maybe you're wanting me to come up with some like, specific thing that we'll be doing. But for me, it's a larger question, ethical, moral question, right? Like, how do we instill into young people, and not just Latinos, African Americans, Anglos, what does it mean to be a good citizen? What does that mean? What is civic engagement, and how can we do it? How can we express our anger and our disappointment and our fears and not use violence?
Mm.
Because that's, I think, and that's heavy. Like, I don't know how we do it, and I hope we can do it somehow through education, but our schools are being privatized. They're turning into charter schools. This is not, and to borrow from the Mandalorian, this is not the way. Well, it's actually the opposite of Mandalorian, but anyway, and so I tell people this all the time. I consider myself, and this is sort of like, and anybody who's ever worked with me, I get young people into my company, I teach them, and then I send them off into the world, and I call them Jedis, because I consider myself like, I very much live the Star Wars life. So for me, it is very much a battle of good and evil. And I try to bring people in, create Jedis out of them, teach them the skills that they need to go out and create a better world. But I do fear for the next generation. Like, what is their understanding of, what does it mean to be a good citizen? Do they think it's worth it, right? Is it worth it to go vote? Is it worth it to have a voice? Oh, we all talk about, oh, our vote is our voice, our vote is our voice. Do they even want to have a voice? Do they even want to participate in the shenanigans, in this thing that we call democracy, right? This stuff that happened this last week is extremely profound. It is a profound statement of our democracy. And it is cut to the core of what I do for a living, right? I live my life getting people elected so that they participate in a system of government that I believe in, that I have faith in. These traitors have really changed, have left a mark. And it makes me angry. It makes me sad. And I hope that we can figure out a way to make sure that the next generation of people respect our system of government, that understand how important it is that we continue to have civil discourse, because we should always disagree. We're humans. I would never expect us to agree on 100%, but we should be able to have a civil discussion about those disagreements and persuade each other. That is what I studied. I studied rhetoric. Rhetoric is, it is as a rhetorician, it is our job to persuade, to use words to change someone's mind or opinion, not violence, right? And so it's very disheartening. It has me very concerned. And it's changed things. It's different now. It's different.
Yeah, I just want to clarify for, whoever's watching this years down the line, you're talking about January 6th, 2021, which is, I'm sure, a date that will be known, the attack on our Capitol. And so speaking about this event, hearing you talk about your hopes for the future, the cynical part of me wants to say, well, that's, really? Did we see what just happened? Like what it seems like, and speaking about rhetoric and just how we, use our words, it seems like one side in particular, the Republican side, not all of them, but a lot of them, a majority of our elected officials at the national level, are, for whatever, reasons that they'll know, choosing to allow and repeat and follow the rhetoric of a dangerous man, right? And they have made this their identity. They have accepted this. Do you really believe that like we can come back from this? Like what is the future?
Well, yeah. It's all about power, right? It's all about power, right? And at the end of the day, power and money, and for some reason people like that. I don't know why. Maybe because I've never had power or money. Maybe if I had it, I would really want it. But so this need to have power, it's disheartening. I have hope. I have hope. If I didn't have hope, I wouldn't be getting up every morning and continue to do this crazy job that I do. I hopefully that these folks like Ted Cruz, who is a despicable human being, who sits there and literally is pouring gasoline on the fire, and then the fire, blows up, and then, seeks repentance. And it's like, dude, really? Come on now. Like, you can't sit here and say you didn't know what you're doing. You know exactly what you're doing. He should resign, and he's a disgrace to the state of Texas. But he's doing it because he wants to be president of the United States. And I kind of at one point want to go like, so what? It's like, really, dude? Like, how does that make you? I jokingly say, like, well, we're driving down the road and a car like skids off or like drives really fast, like, like takes off, and I turn to my husband and say, oh, sorry, babe, I'm in love with that guy and that car, so I'm gonna leave you now to go. So I'm gonna leave and go catch up with that guy because I really want him, right? And it's just like, it's sort of like mentality, like somehow screeching my tires makes me cool and more desirable to women. It's like, yeah, no. So I just want to, I don't understand what is, it's just, I guess he just wants to be powerful. I guess he just wants to sit and make decisions. And hopefully that, people like Ted Cruz and those others who decided to continue to pander to Trump, that they too will have their reckoning, and that they will get cut off and people will stop giving them money. And I don't know that the Senate will actually try to force him to, force him out. It'd be great if they did, but it is, it's disheartening, but I have to believe in something, Evan. I have to believe in something. I guess I have to believe that men are ultimately good. I guess that's where I have to come out on this thing. But it's hard, and it's going to be tough. And trying to teach our children, lying is bad, and you should be honest, and you should care for your fellow man, while they're exactly doing the opposite and then getting rewarded for it. So, I think we can only just lead by example in our own lives, and hope that our children, see us as um, mentors and someone to look up to, and hope that they don't look up to people like Ted Cruz. Well,
Are you already imagining, like, I imagine that footage of everything that happened last week and that is continuing to happen to a certain extent. I imagine that's going to be plastered in Democratic campaigns.
oh yeah, you can guarantee that you're going to see all that footage come probably next year. They'll always start advertising that, and those folks who refuse to wear masks. Yeah, definitely. All those who stood with Donald Trump. I mean, they're going to have to live with those decisions. Unfortunately, though, we've seen that people like Lindsey Graham, who've been with Trump, they still continue to win just because of the way legislative lines are drawn. But hopefully, Republicans will see the light of day and realize that, Trump and his Trumpism is not Republicanism, and they will get rid of it and let him crawl back into a hole or create his own little party or do whatever the hell he is going to do. But yeah, I think anyway,
Yeah.
lost my train of thought.
No, yeah,
Sorry.
that's a fine answer. Well, I'm looking at my notes here, see if there's anything that I really wanted to get to that I missed. I guess, and just last on this political issue, and we've talked a bit about this, but and keeping it just local, when you are planning, a campaign here, and be it next year or in 2 years, and specifically thinking about campaigns that are oriented towards Hispanics, Latinos,
Mhm.
what are you going to be like beating into the ground? Like, what are some of the points you think, like, okay, this is what these people, again, just be it in San Antonio or be it in Texas or wherever, like, this is what these people care about, and this is who we are, and this is what we're going to tell them
Yeah.
that we do. Like, what are some of the
I
most?
think, yeah, I definitely think healthcare is going to be critical, because when we talk about COVID, access to healthcare, the way, health inequities and health disparities, I think is critical. And that's Dexter, for the record, my dog, my poodle, is barking. He wants to go outside. Hang on, Dexter. So definitely, healthcare is definitely going to be on there. I think hopefully Biden will do as promised, and will make sure that DACA is secured, and create a pathway to citizenship. I think the separation of families and the kids, like, really, I mean, that's just morally reprehensible what they did. And so being able to rectify that and allowing people to seek asylum in this country, and not be left to in Mexico with no way to make their claim. I mean, they weren't even letting people into the United States, which is really, and I get it because of COVID, but even before COVID, they were not letting people come to the United States to claim their asylum cases. So, and then I think, the big thing is going to be jobs. That's going to be huge. How can we get people back to work? I think Latino, and especially Latino women, have been probably disproportionately affected by the pandemic, because we do work in greater numbers in service industry and service areas, so like restaurants, hotels. So getting those folks back to work, and getting them not just as because there's a lot of talk about rebuilding the economy and creating new jobs, and for me, it's like, it's not just about creating jobs, it's about creating good paying jobs, right? Because the way that we lift our community up is by having people have access to capital, right? Having access to money, being able to have, and because if you have a good paying job, then you're going to be able to send your kids to good schools, and it just has this sort of trickle down effect. So, looking at rebuilding the economy in a way that's creating living wages for folks, and then continue to fight for things like teaching Latino and cultural studies in requiring it as part of the curriculum, right? So that people understand our history and the history of Texas, and so they don't think that Davy Crockett is a hero, right? Like they need to understand, you know, the true history of our state and seeing different perspectives, right? And requiring those kinds of things. So, and I think that fight is sort of one that's going to be really under the radar, but fighting for Latino history or Latino studies, as we're seeing it sort of silently, it's sort of been under the radar. They're taking that away from curriculums, so where we're not learning about great Latino leaders. And if they're going to come after us, it's just a matter of time. They're going to go after African American studies as well. So I'm going to take you with me so I can let Dexter out, but because he probably has to go pee pee. But I'm still talking. So
Okay, yeah, I just have one more question,
Yeah.
and it's you know, just sort of kind of in this idea of this Voces of a pandemic project that the center is working on. So, you know, for the person who is watching this way down the line, maybe they were just a child when this was happening, or, you know, we're not even born yet, who knows? As you know, as everybody that you are, you know, a woman, Latina, professional, political, campaigner / consultant, reflecting on 2020, the election.
Dexter. Sorry.
I don't know why I'm waving at the talk.
It's okay. He understands. I didn't just give whoever watching this. That's the dog that was barking. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, yeah. I mean, what do you think? And it, you know, sounds kind of banal, but like, what have you learned? What are you taking with you from this year? Whether it just be like personal, you learn something about yourself, or you learn something about like the world, the country. What do you think, if you reflect on this year, like something that you take with you?
I'll give you a cynical and then I'll give you a uncynical. So the cynical part of me, what I've learned is that and I can't not talk about this because it is so of what's happening right now with Donald Trump and the Trumpism, Trump movement, whatever we want to call it, is that I think it touches upon the darkest part of our souls, right? It is that racism that runs deep in who we are as America. And I do feel that that Donald Trump didn't create this movement per se, or that feeling or that sentiment. He just normalized it and allowed it to rear its ugly head. What I'm feeling, I'm sure people felt in the 60s during the civil rights movement. Like, I feel like we're reliving that time. And so I feel like it's always been sort of this underlying thing. And I worry that it's not something that is just relegated to white people. Like, I feel like it's something that's inherently in our DNA as human beings. And now I'm going to get real philosophical here, but because when we think about us as humans and back when we were cavemen, right? When we think about, we talk about like Freud and other philosophers really talk about, we have these deep-seated, desires as humans, blah, blah, blah. So I like to think about like, what is it about us as humans? Why are we behaving this way? What is leading us to believe this way? Is this something that we learn? Is it something that's nurtured? Or is it something almost like in our DNA, right? And I think about like, as if when we were, people living in tribes, whether they were Indian tribes or Neanderthal tribes or whatever tribes they were, that anyone other was seen as a threat to the tribe, to the health of the tribe. So I tend to think that otherness is always seen as a threat to us by the simple nature of who we are in our DNA, in our sort of natural need to survive, right? We must survive. You are different. You threaten my tribe because you are different. So I'm going to dislike you because you're different, right? There's a part of me that feels like it literally comes down to our DNA. And I don't know that we can ever escape that. But what we can do is recognize it and understand that it's not rational, that it's not moral. And we have to be able to teach our children that, right? Or not teach them otherwise, because maybe they come into this world and they're more accepting and more giving, and for some reason we teach them what other means, right? We teach them the paradigm of what other is, and then that ends up making, creating problems. So that's kind of like the cynical part in me. I've already forgot what I was going to say on the positive side. Go back, remind me again. Oh my God, I'm getting so old. What was the question?
That's 2020. I mean, that's also the year. Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry. What was it again?
It was, your takeaway from 2020. Is the
Oh, takeaway from 2020. Okay, yeah. Okay, so that's the cynical part. Sorry, that's the cynical part. The cynical part says, "Oh my God, we're inherently human. We're inherently evil. It's in our DNA. Oh my God." So that's kind of like the So that kind of scares me, right? But the other thing that I've taken away from 20 and that people are naive and they'll listen to whatever, and that goes to sort of like believing the fake news, because it's like it's this cult. They're following a figure. That's a whole other hour of discussion. But anyway, that's that. On the more positive side, I think that, I hate to use this word because it's just like, it's the word of 2020. It's that whole thing of like resiliency. And that, while yes, there's some people who are total schmucks out there, that there are people who have really are really showing a lot of compassion. And we've seen like a lot of folks giving, like, because they know that while they may have something their neighbor doesn't. I feel like, ironically enough, as isolated as we are, I do feel a little bit sense of like a stronger community, in that, people are kind of looking out for each other. And this idea that we are all connected, not just community, but globally, right? Because I mean, this disease took hold in China, and within months, it was all across the world. And so it just sort of shows how connected we are. And while, yeah, the pandemic might have been a negative aspect of how we're connected, I know there's positive things of that connectedness as well. There's got to be. So I don't know if that answered the question, but
Yeah. I mean, that's what it is, right? I think that's the best we can get for now, is that sort of answer. Before I let you go, Laura, I've been asked to, if you're willing, to ask you to record, to ask you to just to say, and it's already recording, two things. One of them would just be,
Evan is the best interviewer ever.
Yes,
okay,
please.
Got it.
Yeah,
Check.
Thank you.
Check.
And then,
okay.
I'm Laura Barberena, and you're listening to KUT. And then same thing, and you're listening to the Texas Standard, because apparently Dr. Maggie's working with them. So.
Okay. So I'm going to say doctor, because that's kind of
course.
thing now.
Yeah.
I used to never call myself doctor. I was always, oh yeah, I'm just Lauda. But then ever since that jerk off said, that Jill Biden couldn't call herself doctor. So now I'm like, oh yeah. So now I'm a doctor. So, okay. So what I need to say again, I need to say,
my name,
listen to KUT.
Is it my name is, or you can say either I am, or my name is, and this is KUT. This is
KUT. Okay. So let's try this. I'm Dr. Laura Barberena, and you're listening to KUT. Is that right?
Sounded perfect. Yeah. And then can you do the same thing with the Texas Standard?
The Texas Standard. This is Dr. Laura Barberena, and you're listening to the Texas Standard.
All right.
There.
Well, thank you, Dr. Barberena.
You can just call me. You can just call me Dr. Lauda. No, just kidding.
Okay. Yeah,
you can just call me Lauda. No. It's funny because that talk, and I guess we didn't really talk about that in the interview, but it did sort of like, I went and changed all my social media to now either have PhD or doctor, because I didn't have that before.
Right, rightfully so. So.
Anyway, it's kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's
no, thanks.
Can I reach out via email, because I would love, and I think we spoke about this in the pre-interview, anyone that you have who you think would be a good fit for this? I don't know if Andy Hernandez is still with us.
Yeah, Andy is still kicking, and he's a pain in my butt, and I love him. And he's great. You'd be a really good interview.
Fantastic.
And then, of course, there's some, I think I had mentioned maybe the district attorney might be
Yeah,
somebody that we
Joe
could do.
Gonzalez
We'll
or,
never take
yeah.
it for an hour, but there's some definitely other folks that I think would be really good for the project.
Yeah, behind the scenes folks too, you know, other campaigners, consultants, folks, media folks who are thinking about Latino issues. Cool.
I know the perfect guy.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, I'll reach out via
I'll
email.
send you his info, because he'd be really great because he's covered the pandemic and he's one of our columnists here in the local.
Oh, cool. I'll make
His
a note
name
to
is
ask for that.
Gilbert Garcia. So I'm going to say it on the video so that if he says no, he'll be shamed
He'll
forever.
be shamed
He'll be
forever.
shamed forever in the Benson Library.
Yeah,
Which, by the way, I love the Benson Library. I used it a lot when I was working on my
it's
dissertation.
beautiful. Yeah, I
The
bet.
Benson.
Good place. All right, well, thank you, Laura. I really appreciate it. Pleasure
Thanks,
to talk
Evan.
to
It
you.
was so great to talk to you. Great to meet you, and we'll talk
Have a
soon.
good one. Bye.
Take care. Bye.